Around 9:30 p.m. on the evening of September 25, 1981, US time, in some crowded room of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, a multimedia happening unfolded, bringing sound, video, image projection, and performance together in a telecommunication experiment. At the same time, on the opposite side of the globe, at approximately 11:30 a.m. on September 26, 1981, Australian time, artists gathered at the Paddington Town Hall in Sydney were orchestrating their part in this transcontinental exchange. The black and white video images reaching them live from MIT revealed the performer, donned in a US Army jumpsuit and bathed in soft illumination, lying on the floor with her arms and legs outstretched. In her hands, the performer carried two small video cameras strapped to her wrist that captured random images as she gently moved on the ground, feeding images into monitors arranged around her. Meanwhile, a rotation of close-up and aerial views shot from a surveillance camera suspended from the ceiling were projected onto a wall and simultaneously telecommunicated to Sydney. To that followed an hour-long exchange of visual imagery featuring live sky views and flying kites, an element that lent the performance its title, namely Telesky. Conceived by Aldo Tambellini and performed by Sarah Dickinson in cooperation with Australian artist Eric Gidney, this operation was designed to quote-unquote conceptually emulate our everyday interaction with layers of visual information. The foundation of my ongoing dissertation, which investigates artistic applications of telecommunications during a period roughly spanning the 80s, rests upon the accomplishment of this ambitious project through a rudimentary version of video conferencing known as slow-scan television. Invented in 1957 by American engineer Cobthorne MacDonald, slow-scan television, also referred to as slow-scan TV or SSTV, is a narrowband system enabling the transmission of images to distant locations through either radio waves, telephone lines, or communication satellites. To do so, the machine frame freezes an image from a standard video source and digitizes the visual data before converting it into an audio signal that is later retranslated into graphic materials on the receiving end. Due to a severe reduction in bandwidth, slow-scan TV transmits only still and markedly low images and requires an approximately 8-second delay between each frame grabs, a substantial deceleration over the course of which images overlap as they unfold on the receiving screen, each 120 lines erasing a picture while revealing another. Allowing freedom from institutional requirements or constraints, slow-scan TV met with great success with radio amateur operators who were using the system for quite some time when it became commercially available and eventually fell in the hands of the techno-avant-garde at the end of the 70s. From there onwards, slow-scan TV became the flagship instrument of a transnational network of artists disseminated across Brazil, Canada, and the United States in America, Austria, France, Holland, Italy, and the UK in Europe, but also Australia and Japan in the Pacific Rim area, a momentous and far-reaching netting that my dissertation aims at excavating. For many artists, slow-scan TV was synonymous with a complete reshaping of their art practice, marked by a shift towards a performative and at times speculative exploration of images place, where visual interconnections with far-off partners were approached as creative situations in and for themselves. In other words, the aim was never about attaining a concrete product, but rather a communication experience where the process of sending and receiving prevailed. Openly following the efforts of mail art, the emphasis was put on the circulation of images, the rejection of vertically integrated and commodity-oriented mass media, and the endeavor to humanize technology by means of decentralized two-way communications. At the same time, slow-scan TV was revered for its ability to effectively reduce the sense of physical distance, which was implied as a catalyst for experimenting with remote presence. At MIT, in particular, slow-scan TV was widely used. Building on digital printing experiments, designer Muriel Cooper and members of her Visible Language workshop turned to slow-scan TV in the early 80s, developing communication design processes. But it was most notably, some might argue dominantly, within the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, CAVS, that slow-scan TV truly imposed itself as a must. Starting from the late 70s, artists Laurie Burgess, Don Foresta, who I'm spotting at the back, Bernd Krake, Mark Vendel, Charlotte Moorman, and Ante de Muntadas were among the many fellows to delve into the medium and to explore its diverse applications. In fact, slow-scan TV was so successful at CAVS that it almost became a genre in its own right, a trend most notably epitomized by a collective answering to the name of Communication Sphere. Founded in 1977 by artists Sarah Dickinson and Aldo Tambellini in collaboration with Skip Tenzar, then cable program director for the MIT cable system, Communication Sphere was directed towards connecting artists, engineers, and all those interested in the design of an electronic visual network with the purpose of developing potential applications of low-cost telecommunications. Over almost a decade, it served as a catalyst for artistic ventures into telematics at MIT and offered a conceptual framework to Dickinson and Tambellini's artistic journey through what they referred as to the new environment. Born in 1930 in Syracuse, New York, Aldo Tambellini is largely known as a sculptor, painter, and poet with a deeply rooted and obsessive engagement with the color black, as well as a key figure of 1960s underground Lower East Side, where he was decisive in pioneering avant-garde film. He's also generally credited for having created one of the first works of art for traditional television, Blackgate Cologne, which aired in Germany in 1968. What he's less known for, however, is his long-standing engagement with alternative and low-cost telecommunications, whom at the turn of the 80s felt that traditional video was turning obsolete, stating, quote, "Video art is in the past. Today, given the level of technology, artists shouldn't be making tapes and showing them to 20 people in a gallery. Instead, they should be thinking of satellites, two-way cable, and large networks," end quote. Born in 1943 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Sarah Dickinson is for a part a largely neglected figure, her entire career path still awaiting to be deciphered. Mostly remembered as Tambellini's life companion and fellow artist who passed away at only 53, she was a key player in the extensive rise of telematic practices at CAVS, where she was never a fellow strictly speaking, but a Master of Science and Visual Studies student. With an initial background in traditional mime, she dedicated most of her artistic practice to the intertwining of performance and telecommunications, demonstrating particular interest in investigating the properties of movement with regard to what she called the parameters of illusionary space of electronic media. Je vais maintenant demander à Maxime si c'est possible que vous lanciez la vidéo.
Technology and culture are interrelated. From an industrial electronic society, we are moving to a communication information society. Telecommunication brings the world screen to screen, and we become one with a new perception of the world. The electromagnetic spectrum should be considered a natural resource for creative activity. Transmitted information is the new form of art. This is the age of mass media and communication. This is the age of satellite and instant global communication. This is the age of networks. With live global communication system interfacing pre-recorded information experienced in real time, we change our pre-perception of space and time, and new media is as radical in nature as weightlessness is to gravity in space travel.
Merci. I'm waiting for the PowerPoint. Dickinson and Tambellini's first experiment with telecommunications occurred on June 8, 1977 at the Illinois Bell Telephone Company in Chicago, where a pioneering picture phone transmission was arranged in collaboration with artist Sonia Sheridan. A touchstone for future experimentations, Picturephone event was quickly followed up by a dozen of other experimental link-ups, establishing one-to-one as well as multi-point connections with such varied places as Paris or Tokyo, and through a wide range of systems encompassing cable TV, video disc, teletext, facsimile, and by all means slow-scan TV, which quite frankly stood up as a favorite. Interestingly, most of those experimentations, as with the case with Telesky, burgeoned within a specific context, that of the Sky Art conferences, a series of 4 international events that kept the CAVs busy from 1981 to 1986, bringing together a diverse assembly of artists as well as scientists, engineers, astronomers, astrophysicists, astronauts, biologists, meteorologists, sky travel engineers, and historians of flights, but also representatives of air traffic and communication authorities with the ambitious goal of, quote-unquote, extending human life in the air and in space. While documenting artistic commitments to the future of art in space, these endeavors collectively aim to chronicle the burgeoning field of sky art, which emergence is indelibly connected to artist Otto Pin, who coined the term in 1969 and subsequently established it as a hallmark of CAVs during his tenure as director from 1974 to 1994. Somewhat parallel to the emergence of land art, sky art refers to a large-scale form of artistic expression ranging from kinetic and floating sculptures to fireworks, laser scanning, and holography, but also comprising the creation of far-reaching images tailored for satellite registration, intricate computer processing, and the realm of telecommunications, such as Bernd Krake's 1983 transmitted sculpture or Dickinson and Tambellini's 1983 mobile robot. In essence, transcending metaphors of celestial motifs and straightforward depiction of aerial views, sky art encompasses all artistic messages that travel through and penetrate space. As eloquently articulated by Pinet's wife and fellow artist Elizabeth Goldring, simply defined, sky art is flying images. An idea that strongly resonates with Tambellini's conceptualization of artistic uses of slow-scan TV, which he described as, quote-unquote, invisible processes taking place through waves in the sky, and the sky as an endless space to transport images in distance. Of course, having unfolded within the backdrop of the Cold War era, sky art is also inseparable from the conquest and exploration of outer space, and as such can only be fully understood in the light of a widely shared fascination with space travel and space technology, which unmistakably emulated sky artists' endeavor to propel art within epic distances and infinite time. And as the reach into space was becoming synonymous with the possibility of an endless distribution of art into far-off or even uncharted territories, it took on global implications. According to a pervasive articulation of discourses linking technological development to modernization, global interconnectedness, and planetary awareness, sky art started associating satellite traffic with a sense of harmonious unity and interconnectedness. So is the conceptual background against which occurred Telesky, a performance that Dickinson conceived as, quote-unquote, a metaphor for the astronaut floating in space. In Telesky, Dickinson and Tambellini realized their vision of a future where advanced information and communication technologies would force the collapse of distances and the merging of time zones, thus giving rise to what they called a media environment. In the process, slow-scan TV became a metaphor for space travel and telecommunications art, an extension of oneself into sky, thus illustrating Tambellini's advocacy to, quote-unquote, let television, in whatever technological development, take us in a floating spaceship of brotherhood. Taking that into account, the concept of communication sphere clearly aligns with Pierre Terlat de Chardin's notion of the noosphere, a portraying of a planetary consciousness that finds resonance in the many poems written by Tambellini in the 70s and 80s, in which he repeatedly prophesizes the advent of a future where, quote, we would all sit in a NASA control room, witnessing simultaneous events coming to us, reducing time zones and distances, and bringing the planetary society within the confines of simultaneous time delay, end quote. In essence, akin to the historical avant-gardes and their characteristic technological metaphors for the universal communion, Telesky appears to be grounded in a belief in the transformative power of media and a surge of technological faith. With that in mind, it could easily be said that Dickinson and Tambellini's concept of communication sphere was yet another utopian vision conceived by and for artists. In fact, by dealing with some conceptual cartographic abstractions of the sky and space, communication sphere raises fundamental questions regarding the utopian nature of telematic art. As shown in recent studies by such scholars as Gabriele Balbi, Frédéric Douzet, Andreas Fickers, and Nissa Parks, the sharing of the orbit resource and the allocation of the electromagnetic spectrum are essentially geopolitical issues tempered by technological considerations. And so, at a time when the US Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, had proclaimed its quote-unquote open skies policy, calling for almost no government regulation over satellite facilities, thus effectively initiating the era of privately owned domestic commercial satellites, and when 90% of the radio spectrum was controlled by countries with only 10% of the world's population, not to mention the substantial militarization inherent in space exploration, Dickinson and Tambellini's space-age utopianism appears rather carefree, if not reckless. And in fact, it has often been alleged that 1980s telematic art had failed to critically engage with the ways in which communication is necessarily mediated by power relations, one key criticism being that of the extent to which telematic artworks aim at fostering relations between users, but often do not consider the quality of the relation that manifest, between whom they take place and whose benefit they serve. But a more apt analysis of Dickinson and Tambellini's exploration of slow-scan TV suggests a counter-narrative. So far, my doctoral research has focused on the fact that at the turn of the 80s, artists' use of telecommunications collided with an intricate set of geographic, politic, and economic conjectures governing access to and regulation of telecommunication services. This, I argue, operated an overlooked shift in the history of media arts, that is, its geopolitical turn, an inclination that finds perfect illustration in the discourses that accompanied the conceptualization of communication sphere. In many ways, indeed, Dickinson and Tambellini's archives revealed that they quickly realized that inequalities in the development of telecommunications and strategies of domination conducted by the most advanced countries raised new questions regarding the evolution of the world balance of power and the notion of globality. In short, the problem lied in the asymmetry between different parts of the world in their access to telecommunications equipment and information flows, which risk leading to a new kind of centralization, increased regional disparities, and uneven international development. These concerns were addressed by Dickinson in a nearly 100-page essay titled World Politics and Satellite Communications that she wrote in February 1983 as a grad student at MIT. In this comprehensive text, she delves into the issues that surrounded the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, at the turn of the 80s, a time when the global spectrum allocation was getting increasingly entangled in the North-South dispute over a quote-unquote New World Information Order. Dickinson further argues that the global management scheme of the electromagnetic spectrum is in no way a passive issue, but rather bring to the fore in a post-colonialist era the recumbent questions associated with sovereign rights, self-determination of nations, and economic development, stating, quote, "The ability to communicate via telecommunication systems can no longer be idealized as a factor toward achieving global unification. Rather, it is becoming a matter of serious concern to each nation, most capable of generating political manipulation than collaboration," end quote. In brief, and as Tambellini succinctly captured it in a 1981 handwritten note, the question is as to whether communication will be a natural human right or whether it will become a commodity at the highest price. Looking at communication sphere experiments with slow-scan TV in this context, one could argue that the purportedly utopian nature of their works aligns more closely to the contemporary debates of their time, particularly those revolving around the international law notion known as the common heritage principle, which stipulates that outer space should benefit all nations regardless of their economic or social development. As addressed by scholar Marvin Soros in a 1982 article titled, and perhaps not by any chance, Commons in the Sky, spectrum is considered a natural resource, traditionally and through treaties, akin to the moon and other celestial bodies, which makes it legally ineligible for individual appropriation. Yet, to ensure efficient use and prevent interference, it is necessary to regulate its use and allocation, which in most cases have been governed by a practice of first come, first served. Also referred to as squatter's right, this principle has been at the heart of debates at the turn of the 80s, when non-aligned countries started criticizing it, as it allowed technologically advanced nations to maintain a permanent hold on an international resource. Considering Tambellini's extensive collection of clippings covering debates about spectrum governance and its status as a shared asset of humanity, his deep interest for the matter leaves absolutely no room for doubt. This, I argue, can help elucidate the paradoxes inherent to his and Dickinson's astute understanding of the geopolitics of information and communication technologies regarding their seemingly idealized conceptualization of the spectrum as a quote-unquote spaceship of brotherhood. From this fresh perspective, it becomes apparent that Dickinson and Tambellini recognized in the 80s that the momentous decisions being made in telecommunications policies would establish irreversible patterns foreshadowing the concentration of power that is today made visible by data governance. As Dickinson stated in 1982, quote, "Without a concerted effort on the part of those who regulate the media, we can most certainly anticipate the social phenomenon of information rich and information poor," end quote. To conclude on an open question, it is rather intriguing to note that Tambellini and Dickinson's use of slow-scan TV, and to a certain extent sky art in general, shares many resemblances with our contemporary digital landscape, starting with a shared lexicon and aesthetic concerns. In many ways, indeed, the term cloud, commonly used in the digital realm to refer to online storage technologies, reappears today as an environmental metaphor reminiscent of communication sphere experiments. The environmental parallel is, however, misleading, since two very different realities are involved here: the cloud as a visual commercial metaphor suggesting a natural functioning of digital technology on the one hand, and a sky metaphor symbolizing the struggle for equitable access to information and communication on the other. Thank you for your attention.